Welcome to the Pre-Writing Secondaries workshop. My name is Joanne Stapp, and we are going to jump into how to get started with your secondaries for the application process. So, for those who are not familiar with the process, if you've submitted your primary application, what is going to happen? One of two things is going to happen. If you're applying to an application system that has the secondaries embedded within the primary, meaning a COMIS or ASDAS or CASPA, you're going to find that a lot of the writing you're going to do is going to be really upfront. You have to do the writing, you have to write the school-specific questions in order to submit the application to those schools. And for that, you still want to get organized. And for my pre-meds and some of my pre-dental folks, a lot of your secondaries are going to come after you've submitted and after your application has been verified. They're going to email you secondaries in the mail. So all a secondary is a school-specific application. They usually cost between $50 and $150, on average about $100. And they're, like I said, they're going to come in one of two ways. It's really important, if you're going to be applying to 10 or more schools, to get organized with your secondary information. And the reason why you want to get organized is this can be a really overwhelming process, because for each secondary you're going to have another set of prompts. So each school has its own set of questions. For the ones that mail it to you, you're going to have a unique username and password. You're going to have a separate link with a separate portal that you have to go into to do your secondary. And so there's just a lot to keep track of. And if you're going to be applying to, let's say, 20 schools in your application, you're going to get a bunch of emails after your application is verified asking you to do these secondaries. So before we jump into the prompts, I want to stress to you that it's a really good idea to get organized, create a Google Sheet, list your schools, do research about the school, know why you're applying to that school, and have a couple columns that track all that information, and then have columns that track your secondary link, your username, your password, and I highly recommend that you track dates. Just what date you received your secondary, what date you submitted it. And the reason why you want to track the date you received it is you generally want to try to turn the secondaries around within a month. And so if you have a secondary and you're not really keeping track of when you got it, it'd be very easy for you to sort of lose track of that, and maybe a month would go by, and if you haven't submitted it yet, you're kind of getting it to that point where you're getting, I don't want to say late, but you want to get it done. You want to get it submitted. So tracking dates is helpful for you just to know which ones you should do first and do sooner than others. This is an example of a way you can organize your secondaries. You can just list all of your schools and then create Google Docs for each of your schools, and then color code it based on where you are with the process. So if you're create a color for drafting, create a color for if you have an advisor you're working with or a friend who's reading your secondaries. Create a system that you and that person can work around that lets you and that person know where you are in the editing process. This is going to help you, again, just not feel overwhelmed by the amount of volume that you're going to have. If you imagine applying to, let's say, 25 medical schools, and each school has a separate list of 5 or 6 essays, it's really easy if you have 25 different documents just to lose track of where you are with which document or with which school. So the more time you spend up front getting organized and get this whole system set up, and then stick to the system and just go very carefully, slowly down the list, do things very deliberately, it shouldn't feel overwhelming to you. It should be doable for you. So as we get into secondaries, just a few things that I want to stress to you when you're drafting out your answers. Right now, for your prompts that you're considering pre-writing, you can find a lot of prompts online. If you go to, if you just Google secondary prompts, I hate to send you to SDN, Student Doctor Network, but they do have all the secondary prompts from last year. A few other sources have secondary prompts. You can generally find them online. If you really can't find them, if you come to drop-ins on Wednesdays, I have a lot of the prompts from previous years. I'm happy to share them with you. But basically, you're going to start by finding all the prompts, putting them together, and once you have all the prompts, then you're going to go through and you're going to just draft write. And what does that mean? We're going to just put your thoughts on paper and you can do the best you can, but I really encourage you to get help with your secondaries. So even though it might feel very straightforward, the questions might feel very simple, I highly recommend that you come to an advisor at HPAC and have someone look at your prompts, especially the ones that are causing you some problems. And you can do that through drop-in advising, or you can make appointments with the staff advisors. So as you're doing that initial sort of brain dump where you're just like putting all the ideas on paper, here are some things you really want to make sure you're paying attention to. The goal with all of your secondaries is to show that school that you really want to be there. When they have that many applications, some of these schools are going to have 2,000 apps, some are going to have 6,000 apps. If you sort of meet the cutoff, if there's a cutoff, if you meet their criteria for what is considered a strong application, they're looking at you going, okay, why would you want to come to our school? And the people who are going to stand out to them are going to be the ones that make a compelling case in the secondaries that really prove that you want to be there. And this is really, really true for California applicants applying to out-of-state schools. A lot of the out-of-state schools already have an idea in their head that maybe you don't really want to leave California. I'm not sure where they got that idea. But if you want to stand out to an out-of-state school, the best thing you can do is make a very clear and compelling case for why you would want to be at whatever school. And the best way to do that is by knowing who they are. So if you know specific things that they're doing at that school, meaning the clinics that they run, the community name, the region, if it's a border city, or if it's an urban city, or if it's a rural city, if you know about them, then when you're talking about why you want to be there, you're just going to make natural sense to them. So you have to know them, and that takes that research. And then you need to, it's like a marriage. You need to say what it is that they can do for you, but that's not really enough, because they already know that they're great. They know they can make you become, the doctor or the dentist you always dreamed of becoming. But you've got to figure out, how do you weave who you are with who they are? And that means, how do you show them the value that you bring to them? So yes, maybe if they have a student-run clinic that serves a Spanish-speaking population, you can say, I would love to be able to train in an area that's going to prepare me for my goal, which is to work with an underserved community. That's nice. That's what they can do for you. But what can you do for them? Well, having worked at such and such clinic for 2 years while an undergrad, I really gained insight into providing linguistically and culturally appropriate care. Plus, I speak a little Spanish, and I can help with increasing access and addressing that language barrier. So those are things that you can do for them. And we want to make sure in any answer we can, whenever the opportunity arises, and sometimes you kind of make that opportunity, you want to show them specifically, how do you tie who you are with some aspect of who they are. So whether you speak Spanish or Cantonese or Arabic or whatever it is, maybe you don't speak any language, maybe you just have a lot of understanding about a particular culture, you want to show them that you can use that insight, that knowledge, and be able to serve communities there. A lot of applicants I've worked with in the past are part of the LGBTQ community, and they use that to talk about increasing access for that community by providing appropriate care. So there's lots and lots of ways that you can bring value, and it's sort of, I guess, your burden and your responsibility to figure out what that is and articulate that for them. And if you can really show them how they can help you reach a specific career goal, that's gonna be very clear and direct, and I think that's probably your best strategy with standing out to them. So we're going to look at a lot of different samples of questions, and then we're going to look at some examples that I have from previous years. So a lot of people write a general diversity question or answer, and then they think that the best way to go about this is just copy and paste the answer into the same question, or all the diversity questions. But I'm going to make a compelling case. I'm going to try to make a compelling case that that's not really the best strategy. So whenever you see certain questions, I think most people just leap to the assumption that it's a diversity question. So let's take a look at these 3 questions and see if the same answer would work for all 3 of these. So the first one, learning from others is enhanced in educational settings that include individuals from diverse backgrounds and experiences. Please describe your personal characteristics that would add to the educational experience of others. So they're asking you to talk about yourself, who you are as a person, and then show how that would bring educational value to your classmates. So the educational experience is the key word there. And when they say personal characteristics, are they talking about you listing all of your experiences? Are they talking about, you just telling them how much you like them? They're really trying to get you to do exactly what I just said, which is take who you are as a human and think about how that perspective that you bring is going to help inform other people. Now, your personal characteristics can extend a little bit beyond just your identity. It could extend to, I would say, things that have happened in your life that have influenced your perspective. But what I really encourage you not to do is just start listing out your experiences in terms of like what you did in college and then say, well, that'll be helpful for others. It's not, you doing things in college isn't helping anybody, right? It's the fact that you did certain things does not bring anyone else on earth value. However, you have the responsibility to take what you did and process that and then, I guess, spit out a perspective. You got to tell us what perspective you bring as a result of doing those things. And it's that perspective that is going to help other people. And so in sharing that perspective. So that's a very specific question or answer to a question. Now, the next one is, this school practices inclusive excellence. Right there, our minds should be like, all the bells and whistles should be going off, which celebrates differences, talents, and qualities of all individuals. Describe how you will pursue inclusive excellence in your studies while contributing to the collaborative environment at this College of Medicine. Okay, is this the same kind of question as the first one? Would the same answer work here? I would argue no. When it says, how would you pursue inclusive excellence, I think we first have to think about, what does inclusive excellence mean? So what does inclusivity look like? What does being inclusive look like in an academic space? And I'm sure a lot of you have already thought about this, but generally inclusive means to make sure that everybody who's there feels as though they can participate. They feel as though they have equal say in whatever you're discussing. You could say to someone, I included everyone, but do they feel that way? And whether someone feels that way, that's mostly managed by the group dynamic. So how do you pursue inclusive excellence in your studies? I would think about past experiences where you have worked to make sure that the group is inclusive of all the people involved. And so when you think about a collaborative environment, what you would want to do is either tell a story about a time when you've done something like that and then tie it back to your future with, this is how I could do that in medical school. Or you could create a hypothetical situation in terms of how you imagine that going. But this is really about creating inclusive spaces. I imagine, though, that someone reading this and they see the word inclusion is they could automatically jump to, oh, this is a diversity question. So the last question we'll look at is, the School of Medicine regards the diversity of an entering class as an important factor in serving the mission of the school. Write about things in your background that have been important to your development or that have been challenging to you on your path to a career in medicine. And then it goes on to list things you could consider, which are all things about our identity. Explain how these have influenced your goals and preparation for a career in medicine. So this is a big question. We have, write about things in your background that have been important to your development or challenged you, and then how have they influenced your prep for medical school. So this is kind of similar to your first one, except what's the big difference here? The first one says, would add to the educational experience of others. So this is really about teaching your peers. And the second one is, how have these influenced your goals in preparation for a career in medicine? So the third one is about medicine. You're talking about you as a future physician. So would the first answer work for the third answer? Any thoughts? How many of you thought you were going to just write a diversity answer and start pasting it into all the diversity questions? Did anybody think they were going to do that? I get that a lot. People often think that I'll just write an answer, I'll draft it up and it'll be ready and then I can just copy and paste it. So I wanted to show you these 3 questions because I want you to understand that when you're drafting your secondaries, it's really, really important that you not just blanket paste everything into questions that seem similar. It's important for you to stop and read the question, highlight or underline the important elements of that question, and make sure you're addressing the whole question. Make sure you're giving them exactly what they're looking for. If you write an answer that doesn't make sense to their question, they're going to think one of 2 things. A, they're going to think you copied and pasted the answer, which says what? It says, I don't really care about this question. I don't really care about your school because I didn't even take the time to read the question. Or 2, they're going to think this person doesn't know how to read, right? They read a question, they have no idea what we're asking for. So your ability to read and understand a question is pretty important in becoming a doctoral level, professional. And so I don't know which of those you would prefer that they think about you, that you don't care about them, or that you have an inability to read and understand. Neither is desirable, right? So it's really, really important that you take that time and do that work. You're also going to see a lot of adversity questions in secondaries, and some of these include tell us about a time you failed at something, and that can come in all kinds of versions, different ways of saying that. Tell us about any challenges you faced on your journey, and describe any adversity you faced and how you overcame it. So let's unpack these just a tiny bit. Failure is not the same thing as adversity in the sense of a challenge in life. So when you fail at something, it's actually really attractive for you to be a failure. I know that sounds really funny or maybe a little wacky, but when you fail at things in your life, whether it's failed at a research project or failed at class or failed in some other way, what it taught you is that you figured out how to bounce back, you figured out how to persist in that situation, and you were okay, you kept going. And so when you fail, it actually shows resilience, it shows persistence, and that's one of the core competencies that a lot of schools are looking for, is resilience and persistency. So please don't be afraid to talk about your failure. Pick one good one. I personally like a good crash and burn story where you just totally messed up. You just straight up made a mistake, and it was embarrassing, and it hurt, and maybe you cried, but you figured out what you needed to do after that, and you picked yourself up and you kept going. That's a great failure story. So anything like that would be wonderful in this. It could also be a major failure, like maybe you failed out of college your freshman year and had to take a leave of absence and come back. That's also, significant and worthy of mentioning. But you can decide, if you haven't had too many failures in life, then just pick something, anything. It could be a failed relationship, it could be a project, it could be literally anything. The second one, tell us any challenges you faced on your journey to medicine, is actually looking for you to talk about struggles you've had during your process. So this would be coming from a background where you weren't prepared for college, or having major blunders during college, major mistakes, major things you did wrong, or having life situations come up that caused you a lot of challenges in the classroom. It could be test taking issues, if you were sick, if you broke your leg, just anything that came up along your path that kept you from doing as well as you wanted to do. And then the last one, describe any adversity you have faced and how did you overcome it. And in this question, it's really broad, but adversity you have faced would be something outside of yourself, right? So that would not be the same thing as I totally messed up and I made a mistake, I failed at something. This would be something that's more happening to you. So it would be like, I had a bad roommate my freshman year in college, or my parents were getting divorced and I was distracted, or I broke my leg. So these are things that happened and then you faced them, and then how did you work to get past it? So again, look at these 3 questions. very different questions, and they all kind of feel similar. They're all adversity questions, but they're asking very different things, and you certainly would not want to use the same type of answer for each of these. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to raise your hand or unmute. I can't see if people raise their hand because I'm on sharing mode, so you might just have to unmute and let me know if you have any questions.
I have a question.
Yes.
So are we supposed to like, I know like adversity could be a lot about like grades and stuff as that as well, but should we talk about like, like our grades or like if we struggled like with certain classes or
So that's a great question. I think that depends on the situation. So, for example, if your definition of failing is getting a B minus in OChem, then I would say no. That would not be worth mentioning. I don't think any B minuses or anything below, if you have a B or a B minus, I would not talk about that as a bad grade. If you have C's, then I would start with how many do you have? If you have a couple of C's on your transcript and they're in classes like OChem or chemistry or calculus, I would say no. I wouldn't bring that up. I think that those are very common and they're not going to blink an eye at that. They're not going to care at all about your C minus or your C in OChem. If you have several C's or worse throughout your first 2 years of college, and there was some reason for that, meaning you had not adapted well to college or you were struggling with mental health or whatever it is, then yes, I would talk about the struggle that you had your first 2 years, but I would end that by pointing out the upward trend that you've developed and how you've overcome that and how well you've been doing since then. Does that answer your question?
but just basically it depends on like how bad you did and
Yeah, but
like let's say like you're not like a completely like an A student, but you've gotten B's most of your life, but that's still not a
if you
failure.
if you're a mostly B student, and I mean if you're above a like a 3.2 3.3, I probably wouldn't bring it up. And here's why. If they, let's say that they're going to read your grades before they get to any parts of your writing. If they look at your grades and they're just like, oh my gosh, this is abysmal, we could never ever bring this person in because he'll never make it in med school, if that's how they feel about you, then they will never read your personal statement. They will never read your secondaries. They can just say no at any point. They're not legally obligated to read your entire application. So they're going to read your app as long as they want to in order to make a decision about inviting you. So they're going to read your grades first, they're going to see your scores, they're going to see your biographic information and your disadvantage statement, and then they'll go to your experiences, and then they'll go to your personal statement. At any point, they can still say no, right? As soon as they don't like you for any reason, they say no. And then let's say they get all the way to your secondaries. This is a huge commitment this person has made to you, right? They have already spent probably 5 minutes reading your application. That's a lot for a tired, busy professional. So if they've gotten this far, there is a good chance they already like you. And if you are super insecure about your grades and you start bringing up things that weren't really a concern to them, now you're making yourself seem like you're pointing out problems about yourself. Whereas if they already got to this point, more than likely they've already sort of forgiven that issue. B's, I really wouldn't go into detail, but like I said, if it's a significant challenge, they probably would just be curious about it. They probably would want to know what was going on in your life at that time. And as long as you show them what was going on, because again, they already got past all of that, they already decided you were worth reading. They get to this point, you're just gonna very unapologetically, non-defensively explain what was going on. We don't need to go on and make a big deal about it. We just need to say, this is what happened, this was the result, this is how I reflected about it, this is how I've grown, and this is how I know that I'm going to be just fine right now. I have an upward trend, I did a post-bac, I took an extra year of science classes and did well. However you grew from that experience, you're just going to point that out to them, and then that's it. That's all you need to say about it.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions about adversity? Okay. The other kind of questions that I've seen more and more in the last couple of years are social justice questions. And so these are some examples of questions that I've seen in schools across the country. So, what have you done to help identify, address, and correct an issue of systemic discrimination? So, what could you possibly talk about in this case? You can't really correct an issue of, I would say, at this stage in your life, you probably didn't eliminate a systemic discrimination, right? But how could you have addressed something like that? You could talk about an example if you're volunteering in a lab. Maybe you noticed a rule that was excluding people. Maybe in your club you realized that there was something you guys were doing that was discriminating against a certain group of people. Maybe you tried to create a process or a policy that was more inclusive. So a systemic discrimination is something that is in a policy. It's something at a higher level. It's not just a friend group. It's something that's in writing that says we're going to do it this way, and it's causing some group harm. So you have to think really hard about some time when you've done something like that. Now, let's say you just can't. You can't think of a single time when you've done anything like that. What do? Well, you do the next best thing. You give them whatever you can think of. So maybe you say, I can't think of a time I have addressed an issue of systemic discrimination. However, I did witness a lot of discrimination when I was doing blah, blah, blah. And in order to combat that, I did X, Y, and Z. So you try to do the best you can. You give them as close to the answer as you can. And if you can't do it, you just try your best, right? You're not going to totally fail out of this process simply because you can't think of an example, but you're going to get more, kudos if you give it a try. If you just can't answer it, that's the worst thing you could do. Explain how you plan to sustain your efforts to advocate for current social justice issues as a medical student and as a physician. So the phrase here, sustain your efforts, suggests you're already doing things to advocate for current social justice issues. So what have you done currently to address current social justice issues? And then how do you imagine you'll stay involved? So whatever school this was, I would look at that school and see what opportunities they have to get involved in issues like this. So for example, if they have an allyship club for LGBTQ, you could talk about wanting to get involved in that. Maybe they have a free student-run clinic. Maybe they have other groups that go out and do work with marginalized communities. But whatever it is, you find something about that school that would allow you to continue doing that. Or you can also talk about your goals as a physician or a dentist or whatever. If your goal is to, let's say, decrease health disparities in certain communities, then you can talk about how you might break that task down and through a social justice measure like going out and doing public health work and translating all of the documents into Spanish or translating all the documents into Arabic, something that increases access. Even though that's not exactly a social justice issue, I would argue that not having access to language and creating that access is a form of justice. So you can make it work. You can do whatever you want. Pick something that you obviously care about that aligns with who you are and something you've done in your past. Tell us about a time when you advocated for someone or something. What did you learn? Same thing. Pick a situation and tell a story and then reflect at the end. Tell us about a time when you observed, personally experienced, or acted with implicit or explicit bias. Okay, this is tough because most people don't want to admit if they had bias. But the truth is that we all have bias. Everybody has bias. And the more, if you're one of those people that is in denial of that and you're saying, I 100% never have bias against any person on earth, that's more dangerous to the schools than you being very cognizant of the fact that you have bias. And so they want you to be reflective. And so one thing that I want you to notice about these questions is just how reflective you have to be in this process. If you thought that you're just going to jot down some secondary answers really quick and move on, you are in the wrong profession, because this health profession schools are not looking for people who do things quickly. They're looking for thoughtful, reflective individuals. I mean, you're trying to get a doctoral level education, and so you should be able to think critically about these issues and come up with some example to answer the question. This is hard. These are hard prompts. So I'm not saying that this should be easy for you, but I'm giving you fair warning that these are the types of questions you're going to see in your secondaries. And if you don't prepare mentally for this, then you might get thrown off guard, and you might sort of feel like when you start seeing all these secondaries come through, you might feel like you're stuck and you can't move forward because you don't know what to do. So I'm trying to help you with just thinking right now. Obviously, don't go and answer every question I'm showing you right now, because you might not be applying to these schools. When you do your own school list and you find the secondaries for your schools and you look at the questions, when you see questions about social justice issues, then I want you to remember this, and I want you to remember that they are looking for you to show how you've done something in your past, and you need to tie it back to your future. So how is your past, predicting your behavior in your future? Show as much as you can. Be as honest and authentic and genuine as you can. Don't be afraid to say things. Don't be, a lot of people say like, oh, I don't want to say that. It's we shouldn't talk about that, or it's controversial. There is very little that you're going to offend a physician or a dentist. Most health professionals are very used to being very crude and open with everything. So I highly doubt you're going to offend anybody unless you're just being provocative or inappropriate in some way. But if you're genuinely trying to answer the question and you have a situation from your own lived experiences, my guess is it's not going to offend anybody. Okay, so I'm going to pause there, and those were some of the sort of most common questions that you're going to see. A lot of questions that are out there in addition to these are the YS questions. So if a school says, why would you like to come to our school? You, like I said at the beginning, you really need to have done research on every single school that you have attended or that you've applied to, and you need to make sure that you are showing very specifically why it is that you see yourself there. For if you've applied to dental schools or osteopathic med schools, they will ask you like, why osteopathic medicine? Most allopathic med schools are not asking you why medicine at this point. I have no idea why osteopathic med schools are asking you why osteopathic medicine, because they just asked you that in your personal statement, but it is what it is. So they're wanting you to literally tell them your exposure to osteopathic medicine and why it is you're pursuing that. What we're going to do next is I'm going to show you some examples of secondary prompts and some successful writing that I've worked with in the past. So most of these people, if I'm remembering correctly, had used this writing and were successful at getting at least an interview or accepted to that school. So please discuss challenges in your journey thus far to medical school. I'm going to let you read this, and I really want to hear from you. I'd really want you to tell me what your thoughts are when you first read it. What are your first reactions to reading this? You can post it in the chat. So you're saying he didn't really answer the question? Did they ask that in the question? Did they say, how did you overcome it? I mean, I guess we can assume that they're always asking for that, but they literally just said discuss challenges thus far into your, on your journey. That's what he did. He literally just described the challenges. I don't know. He's going to allopathic med school in a month, so this worked somehow, some way. Any other reactions to this? There's something in particular I wanted someone to notice. What do you think about the style of it?
I think maybe he uses a lot of like, or whoever wrote this like uses a lot of imagery, like oh Calc won that round, or they also joked around about remarkable college prep program, none.
Right. So this
Yeah.
person is very funny, right? Like he's trying to be funny. That's it's I don't think it's negative at all. I think it's just like literally making fun of his pretty awful situation that he found himself in. So he's a very funny person, and I mean he thinks he's funny, and so he's trying to bring his personality out. It was very hard. I worked with him throughout the whole process, and it was very hard for him not to be like this. Like all of his writing was very similar in that he let his personality shine through. And even though some people might read that and go, oh, it's not formal enough, or it's not, whatever, I don't know what thoughts were going through your mind. But, and I mean, he ended up with 3 medical school interviews. He ended up getting into one, he got waitlisted at the other. One was a UC, 2 were out of state. Um, it worked to some degree. I mean, 3 interviews isn't like 11, but it's still better than none. So my what I've always told people is that you really want to try to let them hear your voice. You want to try to be as authentic to who you are. Now, let's just say you're the type of person who speaks extremely formally all the time. You always use big words. You always speak very, very academically everywhere you go. Is that someone who, I mean, this isn't a criticism, but like, is that someone that the average American is going to be able to connect to? If less than 40% of Americans are college educated and you're only capable of speaking academically, are you going to be able to connect with the average person? And I think most people would argue no. And so, by letting your personality come out, by letting your honest voice come out, by just writing the way you talk, you're going to let them hear you. You're going to let them kind of get a sense of who you are. And so, I really encourage you to, I mean, we don't want grammar issues or anything, but like, you don't have to write extremely academically in this writing. You can just let your personality come through. So if you think you're a funny person, be funny. I mean, the person's going to be reading 40 apps in a sitting. So anyone who writes this just a little bit different is going to catch their attention because, oh my gosh, can you imagine reading the same answer 40 times in a row and how many people write the exact same thing? So how many ways can you say my grades are bad, right? This is just one way of explaining what happened to his grades, but everybody kind of has a similar story about what happened to their grades. All right, I'll show you another. Oops, hold on, my mouse is going wacky. Here we go. Okay. So for anyone applying to osteopathic med school, this is an example of that. One of the osteopathic questions. What does osteopathic principles and practice mean to you? How will you integrate these into your practice? So I'll let you read that. So this is, I mean, I wouldn't say like this is the number one answer in the whole history of writing this answer, but it's an answer and it worked. I mean, they got interviews and they use this generally with a lot of these questions. What you're trying to do with any question that asks you about the osteopathic principles is simply demonstrate your understanding of the concepts without literally regurgitating information from a website. Because if you Google any of these concepts, like if you Google osteopathic principles, and you're going to find that a lot of stuff's going to come up about the mind, body, spirit. You could literally, put the website into your own words, but how many people are going to do that? Like, how many people who are using DO as a backup plan are going to literally rehash a website in their secondary? So if you could make the answer personal, meaning you have personally understood how you're going to use some of these principles, it makes it seem as though you've not only read the website, but you've internalized it, and you've thought about it, you've reflected on it, and you actually understand how and why you're going to do this. So anytime you can, try to make it very personal. And if they're asking why osteopathic medicine, try to think about, like, why do you really want to do that, and tie those concepts into your own life. If you could strengthen one area of your application, what would it be? What have you done? What do you plan to do to address it and improve going forward? So this is a weakness in your app question, and you'll see this a lot too. Is there anything we should be concerned about? Do you have any weaknesses you'd like to discuss? Anything related to, is there anything you want to tell us, kind of thing. So this is an example of someone's. I'll let you read it. So some of you might be thinking, well, that's really brief. I would say a lot more about that if I were answering this question. You're going to realize very soon, when you're looking at the secondary prompts, the character and the word counts, some of them are really, really short. There are some questions where they literally only give you 300 characters to answer, which is like a couple sentences. And so, yeah, sometimes you're going to get to really explain what's going on in your life. Sometimes you have to cut it down to the bare minimum and just get right to the point. And so things about this things I would tell you if you're talking about anything related to grades is make sure you highlight your upward trend. It's okay that if you have any bumps in the road along your first couple of years, it's almost expected at this point that you have some kind of bump in the road at some point. But if you don't point out that your last year has been amazing and that you have a really strong upward trend, you can say anything, all the things that happened before, but now you're doing great. And when you're doing great at the time when you're about to go, that's the only thing that matters, is that you figured out how to be a good student, you figured out how to study, all of that, and you're about ready to go become a doctor. So that's all they care about with these questions, is, are you ready to do it? Please use this space to describe any challenge or obstacle you have faced prior to your application to med school and how you address that challenge. This is a little bit more of a straightforward answer, not super funny, but I'll let you read it and see how this person also had 3 interviews and 3 acceptances, and was pretty successful in terms of like getting scholarships and whatnot. Any thoughts or reflections on this person's answer to a similar question? Okay. Straight to the point, well balanced in answering all parts of the question. Yep. So, one thing that I really like in answers is where you point out something that um, didn't go well, and then you reflect on how you've overcome that. So, in this case, she actually said that in compartmentalizing her emotions and avoiding her family, she developed an unfavorable relationship with asking for help, which we know is dangerous in entering the medical field, because you really need to ask for help when you don't know what you're doing. So she then shows how she has coped with that, and now how she, even though it has led to her being more self-directed, which was great for this school, she ended up getting into this school because they're a problem-based learning school, and very much focused on self-direction. So this worked for this school. For a school where it's a lot more focused on collaboration, which is also focused on collaboration, I shouldn't say that, but different schools have different needs. So if you're going to a school that has a problem-based learning curriculum and there is a lot of self-directed learning, then you would want to highlight things about yourself that show you being self-directed. And so this was, in any question, we always want to keep in mind the school and who the school is and what they care about. And anytime you can take what you're writing anyway, you're going to have to answer this question anyway, but take what you're saying and tailor it to who the school is. So you should always be thinking about your audience when you're writing something. Then, if you can, and you can make it make sense for the particular school, it's like added, it's like icing on the cake. Yes, you answered the question, but can you make it appropriate for that school's situation? Okay, recount a time when you made a decision you regret. How did it affect you, and what did you learn from the experience? And so this person talks about taking on a project, realized they took on too many things, they completely messed it up, they couldn't get the project done. It was embarrassing, people were mad at them, and so from that they learned, the takeaway is I made sure to never make promises I can't keep. And since then completed several projects successfully and reflected on the lesson. And so this isn't really a personal life problem. This is just a serious, like, I screwed up, I messed up, I hate that I did that, but it is what it is, and this is what I learned from it. Why are you specifically interested in pursuing your medical education at Mayo Clinic? This is a YS. Tell us in a few sentences, that's vague, why you are interested in the top choice track you indicated. Okay, let's talk for a second about tracks. A lot of schools have tracks at the school, and tracks are kind of like majors, I guess. They're areas of healthcare that you're gonna have to commit to, and I say commit loosely, but you're basically going to pick a track when you apply. Almost all of them make you pick a track, and you're going to write why you want to be on that track. So some tracks include things like urban medicine or rural medicine or academic medicine or primary care, research tracks. There's all kinds of tracks out there. Global health, public health, and each school's going to have different ones. And so when you're picking your schools, you might want to know the tracks that you're going to have to choose from, because if you end up getting accepted to that school, you're going to be on one of those tracks. And so that's a good way to pick schools as well. Like, let's say you're really interested in global health, just Google global health track medical school and see which schools come up with a global health track. Then you can make sure that no matter what school you go to, you're going to have the option to be in a global health track that'll help you get out, to another country and do some training while you're in school. So think about what you care about, do some researching, but when they ask you why you want to be on that track, you need to tie it back to something that you've done. You need to make it personal and really convincing that that's important to you. And reference things about their school that they have. Please share with us something about yourself that is not addressed anywhere in your application. That's the important part. You get asked this question quite a few times, and it's usually like, is there anything you want to tell us that's not in your app? This person chose to talk about kind of what happened. They had taken They started community college, they dropped out of community college, they worked for a few years, they went back to community college, they transferred. It took them quite a few years, 9 years, to basically finish college. So he knew that this was going to appear in the timeline of his application, so he used this to just sort of explain what was going on in his family life. So if you have anything where there's some questions or red flags in your app, this is a great place to answer those. If you have no red flags in your app and there's nothing really you need to explain, another thing you could talk about is answering why us in this answer. So if they haven't asked you why us anywhere else, then I would use this answer to talk about why it is that you would really like to be at their school. Also, if you have had any relationships with anybody at the school, meaning you had and I guess I should use the word relationship. If you've had any interactions, like if you went to a fair or an info session or an open house, if you had a meeting with anybody from their school, if you know someone at their school, this is a great place to point out any connections that you have to the school. So you can drop names here. You can say, I had a chance to meet, Julie at the UC Davis Pre-Health Conference in 2021, where I had a really great conversation about blah 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 blah. So this is, you could do anything with this, but I'd really try to make a connection to the school if you can. Okay, so I'm gonna stop sharing. Any thoughts, questions, or concerns about any of the prompts that I shared with you today, or do you have any questions about prompts that I didn't share?
Oh, Joanne, I had a question.
Yeah.
So, you were mentioning the tracks a few minutes ago. So I was wondering, are you allowed to change that track at any point throughout your journey through the medical school, or is it predetermined from when you tell them in the
I'll be
beginning?
honest, I think that's going to depend on the school. I would think you could. I just don't know that 100% for every school in the whole country. That'd be a
Got it.
great
Thank you.
question to investigate for the schools you're applying to. But I would
Okay.
think you could. Maybe after a certain point you can't. Like, for example, I know for my pre-vet students, they can't, like, once they commit to a track after their second year, they cannot change it. That's what they're doing.
Okay.
So it
Got it.
depends on, I think it often depends on the school.
That's cool. Okay. Thank you.
Any questions about anything? For those who weren't applying this cycle, did this make you feel a little scared or stress you out at all? Because it's kind of way ahead of where you're at right now. A little bit, yeah. Yeah, I highly recommend starting with the basics. So starting with like a personal statement workshop and working your way, um, through it. It is doable. It's so the way the process works is you submit your application at the end of May or beginning of June. And then you start pre-writing secondaries in June, and then you usually get them in July, and then you spend the whole month of July writing. You want to try to wrap them up by the end of July, beginning of August. If you do, let's say, 25 to 30 schools, you should probably expect to write about 45, 50 pages in secondaries. So you're basically writing like a 40-page document in a month. And the good part is a lot of the content can be reused, but you still, like we talked about today, need to be very intentional and deliberate with what you're saying at for each of the questions. You really don't want to get in the habit of rushing and just copying and pasting without thinking. If you're doing that, you're doing what I would think a lot of applicants do because it's easy. It's really easy to copy and paste. It's really easy to not think about what you're saying. If you do that, you're going to be like many of the applicants, and people who do things like everyone else tend to fall through the cracks. The way you stand out in this process is by not doing that, by thinking about what you're saying, by tailoring it every answer to the school, being very intentional and deliberate with your words, making sure it's edited really well. I remember when I used to work at the medical school, I worked in New York at a medical school, and it never failed. Like, at least once a day, I would get a call from somebody who had used the wrong name in their secondary. So they were writing to They were writing to us. I was at Zucker, and they were saying Dartmouth in the secondary, and they were mortified, and they were crying, and they're like, "Oh, what do I do?" And I'm like, I don't know. I didn't. It was so much work for me to undo that. I had to call the programmer and undo this and this. I would just say it's fine. Don't worry about it. And but it happened every day. So don't be that person, right? Like slow down, double check your work, have someone look at your writing. Make sure that you're being very careful about what you're submitting because you're spending $100. So you don't want to spend $100 just to get denied very quickly because you used the wrong school name. And this is you applying. This is your chance, right? So you want to make sure you're doing the very best that you can, because you're putting yourself out there, and that's a very vulnerable and scary process in and of itself. But if you're gonna do it, you might as well do it well. Don't sabotage by not submitting good applications. So if you all are good, I'll last call for any questions or concerns about anything. You can ask me anything under the sun.
I have a question.
Yes.
So I know these are so I guess I know DO school is not as competitive as MD schools. So I feel like he should prioritize MDs. Should you prioritize MD schools first since
I think that depends on which one you're more likely to get into.
mm, okay.
So if you are thinking that you are more aligned with DO schools, either philosophically or statistically, then it might be to your advantage to do some of the DO schools early, let them know that you're not using them as a backup. Because when you do your DO apps late, like let's say you wait till August to do all of your DO apps, there are people who do their DO apps in May. So if you do yours in August, what are they assuming about you?
Yeah, they're assuming that you didn't get into your MD
Oh no! Well, no
interview.
one knows that they got into an MD at that point. But they're assuming you did all your MDs first, and now you're coming to them, and you're doing them last.
Um,
Do we generally like when we're treated like someone's backup?
no.
No. So if you want to do it DO and you want to honestly give it a fair chance, then I would maybe do them at the same time. So rank your schools by the ones you know are doable, the ones that are easiest to do, or you can do them in a lot of different ways. You can sort your secondaries by easiest to hardest. You can do them by the ones you want to get into most. I probably wouldn't do only the Californias pre-writing because you're not guaranteed to get a California secondary. So for the DOs, you will get secondaries for the California DO schools, but for the UCs, you might not get a UC secondary. You might not get it till November. So if you spend all your time right now pre-writing UCs, you're wasting time because you could be pre-writing schools that you could submit much faster. The goal is to get your app complete as fast as possible. It's not necessarily to submit your primary as fast as possible. All the primaries trickle in around the same time. Whether you submit on day 1 or day 10, you're all gonna be around the same timeline. When you all start getting your secondaries, the race is how to get your secondaries, your letters of rec, your test scores, your Casper scores, all of that in first. Most people can't do all that at once. Like there are letters that don't come in until September. People can't get their secondaries done. They're taking Casper in September. There's like all these things that keep people from getting it all done. So if any of you are the type that can get all that done in July, you're going to be the first ones being considered for interviews. So that's the race. You don't have to be at the beginning of the race. You don't have to be the first one, to cross the line to win. You can win even if you're like submitted in August, right? Because there's still so many people who are not at that point. So yeah, take your time, do it well, but I would do DOs if you're serious about it.
Thank you.
If you do your DOs early and you get your interview invites early, which happens sometimes, that can be a problem. What I would do is try to schedule your DO interviews as late out as you can. So schedule them for the last possible dates as possible, so that if you end up getting MD interviews early, you're not getting accepted to DO schools too soon. The problem with getting accepted to DO schools too soon is that you have non-refundable deposits you have to put down for DO, and they're usually between $1,000 and $3,000. The MD deposits are always $100. It's regulated by the AAMC, and they're refundable until April. The DOs are not regulated by the AAMC, so they can do anything they want, and their deposits are off, out of line and non-refundable. So they do that to try to get you to lock into them, but that's really not fair to people who don't have thousands of dollars laying around to waste on deposits. So that's why people tend to wait on their DOs. That's why I say, like, if you're in a range, a stats range where it's maybe likely you might end up at a DO school, do it, because it'd be lovely to have an acceptance early and you don't have to stress, right? But if you think you might be competitive, then wait and just schedule your interviews like in October, November. Do you see secondaries generally come out later, or is that it's harder to get secondaries? Both. Some UCs just take their sweet time doing things, and sometimes they do screen. So sometimes they screen people based on different qualities. So for example, the Northern California schools are going to screen for Northern California people, and the Southern California schools are going to screen for Southern California people, and same with Riverside and Irvine. So wherever your zip code is and whoever you are, some of the attributes that they're looking for their school, they put people in different piles and they screen people differently depending on who you are and where you're from. So like both of, like, let's say Sheva and Rohan submit on the same day, you both might get your secondaries at very different times depending on who you are and where you're coming from. It has nothing to do with anything you did wrong. It's just they screen in batches to try to get the people they want in their region first. So we are out of time. I am way over. I will stop recording now. If anyone has any questions, please feel free